Well, welcome back. In this video, I finally start putting this bike back together. So it's quite cold in Australia, and this frame's got pole position right in front of the fireplace, and it's been baking here for about 3 days. So at this point, this paint's nice and dry, and I'm going to start getting this engine ready to put in. So one of the last things I had to do is just put this oil switch in, or pressure indicator, and it sits in the bottom of the sump. So I just put that in, and then what I do is I lay the engine down and just try to get it in a position where I can lift the frame onto the engine. So two sets of hands are much better than one, and two people, this is a piece of cake. So just uh, took our time, positioned it over there, and it just fit perfectly, and there was no scratches or damage or anything. So the bolts lined up really well, and there was no hassle really whatsoever. So here's a look at it from the side and underneath the sump, and there's one good thing about when you do all this work is it finally pays off at this stage, and it's much easier to work on a bike that is literally brand new. So here's just one of the bolts going in. Progressively just went around and made sure it was all in there properly. Now here's the swing arm. One thing I did is I ground off or flapper wheeled off the seam weld, and it just looks so much better like that. And I'm also replacing the bearings in the swing arm while I'm at it. So just use a socket here, tap it in. Ideal weld would probably be to put this in a press, but it can tap in like this fine. Just if you do this, don't hit it directly on the bearing. There's a new bearing compared to the OEM one, so it's just got a few more balls or rollers in there. No big deal. Grease it up, put it in there, new seal, and these seals are quite thin, so it just pushes in by hand, easy. Then there's a little sleeve, and this is the pin. So this little O-ring here came in the kit, and OEM there's not an O-ring, but I'm putting it there anyway because it would just help seal off the water from getting in, and this is how it goes together. So that goes through the frame of the bike, and it just holds it in. Now for the final drive, you just got to put the shaft together, so just tap it in here, and then I'll put this rubber on the final drive of the engine, and once it's on there, it's in a way that you can sort of push it back to get the bolts on. So there's little like tabs of rubber, you just use those to stretch it over the flange on the engine, so that fits really nice. Once I had that rubber in position, I got the swing arm, you just lift it in, screw each of these pins in, and as you screw them in, obviously they're fitting inside the bearing, and that's what holds them there. So you just do both sides, and once they're all tensioned up, it holds itself in the right position. So one side, the left hand side, you've got to do up to 100 Newton meters, quite tight, and the other side, do it up really loose, or not loose, but about 7 Newton meters, just to get some preload on the bearing, and then you use the lock nut. Now getting these bolts in for the drive shaft's a real pain, but you just put them in and tension them up, and that's all fine. Next thing I do is I get the final drive, grease the spline, grease the bush that goes in there, and now given this rear tire's got a 150, which is very wide, and it's a really tight fit to get into the swing arm. So what I've chosen to do now is actually put the final drive onto the rim first, and then I use a bit of wire, you can see here, just to lift up that shaft to hold it in the middle position. Slide the whole wheel and the drive on. As soon as it goes in a little bit, pull that wire out, and it just lines up no problem. So I think that's actually easier than trying to force that big tyre through the swing arm, because it is very, very tight, as I say. So here's the back wheel on and the engine in. It's starting to come together now, and I'm just going to put the front end on. Check my earlier videos on how I did this work and polished those forks, and they can't really good. They're off a XJ650. New bearings, I just grease them up as well. Grease the bottom and top bearings, obviously. Lift it in position, and once it's up there, put the bearing on, and then it's pretty much ready to lock down. So what you do is put the dust cover on first, There's dual lock nuts from the XJ900, so I do it one of them. Now, I've done a few of these, so I sort of know the tension, but you don't over tighten these because they're tapered roller bearings, and so you just nip them up and then have them pretty much finger tight. There's a rubber seal that goes on next, so and then the lock nut. So you hold the bottom nut, rotate the top one so it squashes that rubber, and then do it in a way that the grooves line up, and then you simply drop down this locking tab. And then once that's on, the triple tree top bracket goes on, and that holds everything into position. So there's the steering pretty much done now. You got to tighten this nut up, it's quite tight. Next thing I did was put the front calipers on. So again, they're all rebuilt. Everything you see here is in earlier videos if you want to see how I went about it. So take a look. Once I had the front calipers on, I put some new shockers on the back. So this is quite a good set of shockers. They're fully adjustable and rebuildable. So just slip them on here. Quite simple really. Just slides over a couple of nuts, and that's job done. Just tension up those nuts to hold the shockers on. Now what I do is I've got a disc rear end as well, and I'm just putting the caliper bracket on, putting the shaft through, so just pushing it through and then tightening this up. So this is also quite tight, so it's about 105 Newton meters, and that just tensions everything right where it needs to be. Now this is a 150 tyre, as you can see it is really close, so I'm probably about 2mm gap from the edge of the tyre to the swing arm, which isn't much, but it should be fine. And again, earlier videos you'll see how I did that and I had to modify it. Here's the foot pegs, and I've got some new rubbers from Yamaha Direct, and just put these on. They actually go on really easy. So I painted the foot peg. I didn't grease this or anything, it just slipped straight over. It's got a little groove to hold it there, and I think that looks awesome. So all the hard work I've done to this point is really paying off now, and it's really starting to come together quite quickly. In the next video, I will start on the wiring, so still a bit to go, and it shouldn't be too long, and I'll be trying the engine for the first time. Stay tuned.